It was supposed to be a perfect vacation, a much-needed break from our busy lives. Rachel and I had been married for 10 years, and we decided to escape to a beautiful beach resort for a week of relaxation and reconnecting. The first few days were blissful. Sun-soaked mornings on the beach, leisurely afternoons exploring the local town, and romantic dinners under the stars. But by midweek, things started to feel off. Rachel had always been social, but on this trip, she seemed unusually distant. She spent more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share with me, and often excused herself to take calls. I tried to brush off the nagging feeling in my gut, convincing myself that she was just enjoying some personal time. Yet the unease grew. One afternoon, Rachel mentioned she wanted to check out a local art gallery while I went snorkeling. It seemed like a harmless plan, so I agreed. After all, we both deserve some individual time to pursue our interests. However, as I returned from the snorkeling trip, the receptionist handed me a note. It was from Rachel, saying she'd met an acquaintance at the gallery, and they decided to grab a drink. I shrugged it off, but the seed of doubt was planted. That evening, Rachel was unusually quiet during dinner. Her mind seemed elsewhere, and she barely touched her food. When I asked about her day, she gave vague answers, brushing off my questions with a nonchalance that only deepened my suspicions. The next day she left early in the morning, saying she was meeting the same acquaintance again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to enjoy my day alone, reading by the pool, taking a walk on the beach, but Rachel's behavior was a constant nagging thought in my mind. It wasn't just her secrecy. It was the way she seemed to be slipping away from me, emotionally and physically. That evening I decided to confront her. I asked her directly who this acquaintance was, and why she was spending so much time with him. Rachel brushed off my concerns, saying he was just an old friend she'd run into by chance, but her explanation felt rehearsed, her eyes not meeting mine. The tension between us was palpable, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt a wall growing between us. As the sun set on our resort, casting long shadows over the beach, I sat alone on our balcony, staring out at the ocean. My mind raced with thoughts of what might be happening. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something more sinister at play? The doubt gnawed at me, turning our paradise getaway into a landscape of uncertainty and mistrust. The next morning, Rachel left again, this time without even saying where she was going. I decided to follow her. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I needed to know the truth. I watched as she walked down the beach and entered a small, secluded bar. Through the window, I saw her sit down with a man I didn't recognize. They talked animatedly, their body language far too intimate for comfort. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of fear and anger boiling within me. I felt like a stranger in my own life, standing on the outside looking in at a betrayal I wasn't yet ready to fully acknowledge. I turned away, unable to watch any longer, and headed back to our room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. The seeds of suspicion had grown into a dark certainty, and I knew that our marriage was on the brink of an irreversible change. Returning to our room, I tried to steady my breath and calm my racing heart. But the image of Rachel with that stranger burned in my mind. Every rational thought I had was drowned out by the tidal wave of betrayal washing over me. I needed answers. I needed to know who this man was and what he meant to Rachel. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the door, waiting for her to return. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, I heard the sound of her keycard at the door. Rachel walked in, her face lighting up with a forced smile when she saw me. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, trying to sound casual. But I could see the tension in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at me. "It was fine," I replied, my voice barely hiding the hurt. "Who was that man you were with?" Rachel froze, her smile faltering. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw you, Rachel, at the bar, with that man," I said, my voice growing stronger, fueled by the anger I'd been trying to suppress. "Who is he?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping as she realized there was no point in lying. "He's just an old friend," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met by chance and decided to catch up." "Catch up?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "Rachel, it didn't look like just catching up to me. What's going on? Are you having an affair?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "No, it's not like that," she insisted. "We were just talking. Please believe me." Her words did little to calm my suspicions, but I didn't want to push it further that night. I needed to clear my head and figure out what to do next. As the evening wore on, Rachel retreated into the bathroom to get ready for bed, and I lay on our bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and confusion. The next day, Rachel left early in the morning again, saying she needed to go for a walk to clear her mind. This time, I decided to follow her. I needed to know the truth, even if it meant discovering something that would shatter me completely. I kept a safe distance as she walked along the beach, eventually meeting up with the same man from the bar. They greeted each other warmly, their familiarity making my heart ache. I continued to follow them discreetly, my pulse quickening with every step. To my horror, they headed back to our resort and entered the very room Rachel and I shared. I waited outside, the seconds feeling like hours. I knew I needed to see it for myself, to confront the reality I had been dreading. Summoning every ounce of courage, I used my keycard to enter the room quietly. The sight that greeted me was like a dagger to the heart. Rachel and the man were in our bed, wrapped in each other's arms, their bodies moving together in a dance of passion and betrayal. The intensity of their lovemaking left no doubt about the depth of their connection. I stood frozen, my world collapsing around me. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice my presence. The sounds of their passion filled the room, a painful soundtrack to the destruction of our marriage. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I stepped forward. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Rachel and the man sprang apart, shock and guilt written all over their faces. "Mike, I can explain," she stammered, scrambling to cover herself. But there was nothing to explain. The truth was laid bare before me, undeniable and devastating. "Get out!" I said to the man, my voice low and menacing. "Get out now!" He quickly gathered his clothes and fled the room, leaving Rachel and me alone in the wreckage of our relationship. She sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't find any sympathy for her in that moment. The betrayal was too raw, too deep. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "In our bed, Rachel? With him?" She sobbed, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry, Mike. I never meant for you to find out like this. I was going to end it. I felt so alone." "Alone?" I repeated, my voice rising. "We're supposed to be on this trip to reconnect, and you're in bed with another man?" "I know," she cried. "I know. I messed up. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't stop myself." I turned away, the pain too overwhelming to face. I grabbed my wallet and keys, needing to escape the suffocating reality of her betrayal. Without another word, I left the room, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my heart. I wandered the streets of the town, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had we ended up here? I thought back to the early days of our relationship, the love and happiness we shared. It felt like a lifetime ago. Now, all I could see was the shattered remnants of what we once had. Eventually, I found myself at a quiet beach, far from the bustling resort. I sat down on the sand, staring out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the shore, a rhythmic reminder of the relentless passage of time. I thought about Rachel's words, about the loneliness and distance that had grown between us. Had I been so blind to her feelings, so caught up in my own world that I didn't see her slipping away? As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I made a decision. I couldn't ignore what had happened, but I needed to understand it. I needed to know if there was any way to salvage our marriage, or if this was the end of the road for us. I headed back to the resort, my heart heavy but resolute. When I entered our room, Rachel was sitting on the bed, her face tear-streaked and weary. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but calm. "No more lies, no more excuses. I need to know everything." Rachel nodded, wiping her tears. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll tell you everything." And so, we sat down and began the long, painful conversation that would determine the future of our marriage. We sat on opposite sides of the bed, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavily between us. Rachel looked down at her hands, her eyes red from crying. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself for the conversa. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I need to know everything. Howdy. Rachel wiped her tears and took a shaky breath. It started a few months ago, she began. I met Alex at a work event. We hit it off, and he seemed so interested in everything I had to say. And I didn't? I asked, the bitterness in my voice clear. It's not that, Mike, she said, her voice breaking. We just grew so distant. You were always so busy with work, and even when we were together, it felt like we were miles apart. I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. I clenched my fists, trying to control the anger boiling inside me. So you turned to him, I said. And now you're here, in our bed, with him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am. The apology did little to soothe the pain. I felt a deep sense of betrayal, but beneath it all, a cold, calculating resolve began to form. What's done is done, I said, standing up. I'm going out. Don't expect me back tonight. Where are you going? She asked, her voice filled with panic. Anywhere but here, I replied, grabbing my jacket and leaving the room without looking back. I needed space to think, to process what had happened. I wandered the town aimlessly until I found myself in a bar. The dim lighting and quiet ambiance offered a temporary refuge from the storm raging inside me. I ordered a drink and sat at the bar, staring into the amber liquid as if it held the answers to my shattered life. As the night wore on, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I couldn't just walk away from this. I needed to reclaim some sense of control, to show Rachel that there were consequences for her actions. Revenge wasn't going to heal the hurt, but it might give me a semblance of closure. The next morning, I returned to the room. Rachel was still there, looking like she hadn't slept at all. Mike, we need to talk, she said, but I held up a hand to stop her. Not now, I said coldly. I have things to do. I spent the day preparing, making phone calls and setting things in motion. I wanted to make sure that Rachel and her lover felt the weight of their betrayal. It wasn't just about hurting them. It was about reclaiming my dignity. That evening, I confronted Alex. I had found out where he was staying and decided it was time for a face-to-face meeting. I knocked on his hotel room door, and when he opened it, his expression shifted from surprise to fear. We need to talk, I said, pushing past him into the room. Look, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Alex stammered, holding up his hands defensively. I don't care what you meant, I snapped. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing. I know, and I'm sorry, he said, backing away. It was a mistake. I stepped closer, my anger barely contained. You're damn right it was a mistake, I said, and you're going to pay for it. Before he could react, I pulled out my phone and showed him the evidence I had gathered. Photos, text messages, and recordings of their encounters. His face paled as he realized the extent of what I had. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are, I said, my voice low and threatening. Your colleagues, your friends, your family. They'll all see the truth. Alex's eyes widened in fear. Please don't do this, he begged. I'll do anything. Stay away from Rachel, I said. If I find out you've been near her again, there will be consequences. He nodded frantically, his fear palpable. Satisfied that he understood, I turned and left the room, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it was a start. When I returned to our room, Rachel was waiting, her eyes filled with dread. What did you do? She asked, her voice trembling. Just made sure your lover understands the consequences of his actions, I replied coldly. Now, we need to decide what's next. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Mike, I know I don't deserve it, but can we try to fix this? I love you. I don't want to lose you. Her words hung in the air, a desperate plea for forgiveness. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again, but part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe that we could find a way back from this. I don't know, Rachel, I said honestly. I don't know if I can forgive you, but for now, we'll take it one day at a time. She nodded, relief and sorrow mingling in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. The days that followed were filled with tension and awkward attempts at reconciliation. We went through the motions, but the trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was shattered. It was a fragile truce, one that could break at any moment. Rachel suggested counseling, and although I was reluctant, I agreed. We needed help if we were going to have any chance of salvaging our marriage. The first few sessions were tough, filled with painful honesty and raw emotions. But slowly, we began to peel back the layers of hurt and betrayal, trying to find a way forward. Despite the small steps we were taking, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Every time I looked at Rachel, I saw her with Alex, and it tore at my heart. The revenge I had sought against Alex had given me a brief sense of power, but it hadn't healed the wounds. One night, as we sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, Rachel reached for my hand. "Mike, I know it's going to take time, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I love you too, Rachel," I said quietly. "But it's going to take more than words. We need to rebuild the trust that's been broken." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "I know, and I'll be patient. I'll prove to you that I'm worth it." As the days turned into weeks, we continued our journey of healing. It was a long and difficult process, but we were both committed to trying. There were moments of hope and moments of despair, but through it all, we held on to the love that had brought us together in the first place. The path to forgiveness and reconciliation was a rocky one, but we were walking it together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Months passed, and the intense pain of betrayal slowly dulled to an ache. The counseling sessions helped us navigate through the stormy seas of our relationship, offering us tools to communicate better and understand each other's needs and vulnerabilities. Despite the progress, trust remained a fragile thing, easily shattered by a stray thought or a memory of what had happened. One evening, after another session where we delved deep into the roots of our issues, Rachel and I decided to take a walk on the beach. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, and the gentle waves provided a soothing soundtrack to our contemplative silence. "Mike," Rachel began softly, breaking the silence. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'm grateful you're giving us a chance. I love you more than anything, and I'm willing to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." I looked at her, seeing the genuine remorse and determination in her eyes. "Rachel," I said, taking her hand, "I still love you. This hasn't been easy for either of us, and I don't know if things will ever be the same. But I want to believe that we can build something new, something stronger from this." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I hope so too," she whispered. "I really do." Our journey of rebuilding our relationship was far from over. There were good days where it felt like we were reconnecting on a deeper level, and there were bad days where the shadows of the past loomed large. But we both agreed to take it one step at a time, focusing on the present and what we could do to move forward. Rachel suggested we start new traditions, small things that could help us create fresh memories. We began having weekly date nights, exploring new activities together, and even started a shared hobby of painting. It was awkward at first, but gradually, these moments helped us rediscover the joy of being with each other. We also worked on strengthening our communication. The counselor had given us exercises to practice active listening and expressing our feelings without blame or anger. It was challenging, but it helped us understand each other better and feel more connected. Despite these efforts, the scars of the affair were still there. There were times when I'd see a message on her phone or notice her being distant, and the doubts would resurface. But instead of letting them fester, I voiced my concerns. Rachel was patient, always willing to reassure me and address my fears. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Rachel. "Do you think we'll ever get past this?" I asked, my voice tinged with uncertainty. She looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness and hope. "I believe we can," she said softly. "But it will take time and a lot of effort. We need to be patient with each other and ourselves." Her words resonated with me. I realized that healing from such a deep wound wouldn't happen overnight. It would be a continuous process of rebuilding trust and rekindling the love that had been damaged but not destroyed. As the months turned into a year, our relationship began to take on a new shape. It wasn't the same as before, but it was evolving into something different, something resilient. We celebrated small victories, like the first time I felt a twinge of jealousy, but managed to talk about it calmly, or the day Rachel confided in me about her fears and insecurities. We also faced setbacks. There were arguments and moments of doubt, but each time we came back to the commitment we had made to each other. The counselor's words often echoed in my mind. It's not about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to live with it and move forward. One day, Rachel suggested we renew our vows. At first, I was hesitant, unsure if it was the right step, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It wasn't about erasing what had happened, but about reaffirming our commitment to each other despite everything. We decided to have a small, intimate ceremony on the beach where we had walked so many times, reflecting on our journey. As we stood there, surrounded by close friends and family, I looked into Rachel's eyes and saw a mixture of love, regret, and determination. I promised to be honest, to communicate openly, and to always fight for our love, Rachel said, her voice steady and sincere. I know I've hurt you, and I can't change the past, but I promise to spend the rest of my life making it up to you and building a future together. Tears filled my eyes as I took her hands in mine. I promise to forgive, to trust, and to love you with all my heart, I said, my voice choked with emotion. We've been through so much, and we've come out stronger. I believe in us and in our ability to create a new beginning. As we exchanged our vows, I felt a sense of peace and hope that had been missing for so long. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a real, hard-earned commitment to each other. We were choosing to move forward, to build a new life from the pieces of our past. The path ahead was still uncertain, but we were walking it together. And in that moment, I realized that love wasn't about never falling. It was about always getting back up and fighting for each other, no matter how difficult the journey. And so, with the waves as our witness and the setting sun as our backdrop, we embraced our new beginning, ready to face whatever came next, together.